Hello everyone, welcome to Abhaile, our first ever Returning to Ireland conference. My name is Sarah Owen and I am Project Leader with Crosscare Irish Diaspora Support Project. We're a specialised service offering support to Irish citizens at all stages of their migration. Our work and this conference are made possible thanks to funding from the Government of Ireland's Emigrant Support Programme. So as many of you will know, Abhaile means home. And this simple word holds so much weight and meaning, particularly when viewed through the lens of emigration and return migration. Throughout this week, we have a series of conversations with an excellent lineup of speakers, all exploring themes around return migration to Ireland. Thank you again for joining us for today's discussion on coming home, in which we'll hear personal stories of return from our wonderful panellists. You will have the opportunities to ask questions of our panel at the end of the panel discussion, so please submit your questions in the Q&A section below. Whilst we may not have time to answer all your questions, please feel free to get in touch with us directly for further queries if we don't get to them today. You can also sign up for our upcoming discussions on navigating crisis and rebuilding your professional networks on return, which are happening tomorrow and the day after. Follow us on social media to join the global conversation using hashtag Abhaile2024. We will be sharing a recording of all our discussions, so do share these with your network. You can also visit diasporasupport.ie for all this and for more practical information to support you in your return to Ireland. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Dr Sara Hannafin, who will be moderating the discussion today. Assistant Professor in Human Geography at the University of Limerick, Sarah moved to Ireland in 2004, having grown up in an Irish family in London. Through her research with second-generation returnees, she developed an interest in the way in which migrants navigate their emotional attachment to particular places and how migration can prompt reflection on identity and a sense of belonging. Thanks for joining us, Sarah. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Moving on to our speakers, I'd like to welcome Sarah Whelan, James Parnell, and Richy O'Gorman, all of whom returned to Ireland after a period of living abroad. Sarah Whelan is the founder of Irish Women Abroad, an online community for Irish women living abroad or returning to Ireland. She returned from Sydney, Australia in April 2023 with her husband Stephen and her 2 children after 19 years away in Australia. She had previously returned to Ireland for 20 months in 2016 and 2017. And she's a neurodivergent mum and mentor and has supported lots of women who were thinking about returning or have returned home. She currently runs an online virtual assistant business called Social by Sarah. You're very welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
James Parnell returned to Dublin with his wife Anne-Marie and 3 children after 16 years in Sydney in 2016. He has published several articles in the Irish Times about his experience. He's appeared on RTE, Today FM, News Talk, and participated in Irish government forums helping emigrants returning to Ireland. He's contributed to our own webinar on returning to Ireland with children, and he's written articles on grief and settling in. You can find these at diasporasupport.ie. He now provides guidance and coaching for those thinking about returning at www.anewdawnireland.com, and his book, A Story and Guide for Bold Movers, is available at www.anewireland.com/book. You're very welcome, James.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
And last but not least, we have Richy O'Gorman. Richy is the originator of the hashtag More Blacks, More Dogs, More Irish slogan. He's also the co-founder of Irish and Jamaican and the co-owner of the Sea Moss Boss. Richy currently features as a community activist in Look Back to Look Forward, an exhibition celebrating 50 years of the Irish of Britain, which is being hosted at the Epic Museum in Dublin. Together with his wife, Tarraine, Richy recently returned from London after 25 years there and is now back home in County Tipperary. You're very welcome, Richy.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So without further ado, let me hand you over to Sarah and our panelists, and I hope you find this a very interesting conversation.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks to Crosscare for bringing us together this evening. I hope this is going to be a useful discussion to those of you listening. I'm delighted to be part of the discussion. So what I'm going to do is I have some prompts and some questions for our panelists, and obviously people listening, if you have other questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat, that we can come back to those towards the end of the session. First of all, I'd just like the 3 of you to think back to the fact that you were migrants, you were in a new place, you established your lives there. So having left your homes here in Ireland, you left and the act of migration can be challenging in itself, and that getting settled and getting kind of into the new routine and the job and making a home, and having done that, my first question, or I'd like us first to start to discuss, what is it that brings you to that decision then to leave, having done all the work and kind of got into the place? What were the thought processes that you went through in coming to that decision to leave? And was there an event or a moment or a story you could tell us which tipped the balance? What was the deciding factor in terms of, right, that's it, I'm going? Or was it more of a gradual process that brought you to the eventual decision that time was up and that you were going to go to a different place? So I'll start with James, if that's okay. Would you like to talk us through your deciding moment or your decision to leave?
Yeah, sure. I guess it wasn't really a single moment, but myself and Anne-Marie, who's my girlfriend at the time, we were about like 23 or so when we left in 2000. And like people used to ask us, have you got any plans, or how long have you been here? That's sort of when you meet other Irish people, classic conversation. We never really had a plan, so we didn't really plan it, but the return. But we bought what we thought was going to be our house forever in 2010. So we had roots down. We had 3 children. They were starting school. Suppose missing home, and that ache is always there in the background, but you tend to kind of suppress it a little bit. But coincidentally, our home that we bought was opposite a nursing home, and it did morbidly kind of get me thinking about death and things like that and the future. But I suppose there was a chronology of sort of events that sort of creep up, like your life stage. You have your children. Anne-Marie at the school didn't feel like she fully belonged in as part of the community. There was just the differences, I guess, were more noticeable. And our life stage as well. You kind of want to settle down. You think about what where you want to bring your kids up, what kind of upbringing you want them to have. And obviously we were biased, both Irish. We want them to have the same upbringing as us, because we thought that was a great upbringing. So those sorts of things. And then there was family events, like Anne-Marie's father in 2013 passed away, and we were lucky we were able to go home, and we spent a bit of time with him. But when he got really sick, Anne-Marie made the difficult decision to go back and spend time with him while he was alive in his last few weeks. But then that meant she couldn't go to the funeral. So we watched that funeral from FaceTime at the time, I guess. And that was, things like that, you really make you think of how far you are away from home. So all of those sort of, it was a confluence of events that crept up. And then we were on holiday back in Ireland in 2015, 2 years after that. And we were at a wedding, caught up with loads of friends, made the decision the next day to move home within 9 months, and we did it. So yeah, it's a bit of a creeping up of different things.
Yeah. So there is something about that sort of life stage that when you head away when you're 23, that sense of your own mortality in a way wasn't there, that as with the children and the settling down and everything, it kind of clarifies things in a different way.
It definitely did for me. Yeah. I mean, it sounds really morbid, but and it sounds a bit silly. You're going to be dead, but I didn't want to be dying in Australia. I want my own parents, thankfully, are still here, still healthy. But I wanted to come home for
I'm sure
for the
it's
kids
something
to spend time with
other
them as
people
well.
have thought about as well. Yeah. Thanks, James. Sarah, would you like to talk us through your story?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. A lot of similarities in a way to James's story. So I also moved to Sydney when I was 23 in 2004. So I've spent most of my adult life living away from home. And again, sort of similar, like a lot of things kind of came together. So when we made that difficult decision to return to Sydney again in 2017, we didn't really have a time frame put on it. We were kind of like, let's see what happens. And we were quite content living there. There wasn't a feeling of, I don't know, restlessness or homesickness. We were very settled. And then came lockdown, and my second child. And with that, I suppose the isolation, the priorities kind of shifted as well. And family just became such a huge value of mine. It already was, but it was just, I suppose, more apparent. Also went through a bereavement in the family, which really, I guess, hit me hard to not be home for like the funeral and all those kind of things, not be part of the community, like the grief, like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, not being able to grieve with your own family or community, and aging grandparents. And one of the biggest things that kind of happened was my daughter was diagnosed as neurodivergent, and I don't know, just not having the support, it really hit me. And the absence of the village, I suppose everything kind of came together, and realizing myself that I too am neurodivergent, and like I always felt like I didn't fit in at home in Ireland, and realizing that actually a lot of that was to do with my own, like, the way my brain is wired. And in fact, I wanted to be back home and connect and reconnect with relationships again. So it happened really fast in the end. Long story short, we made the decision in March, and we were home by the end of April, so 8 weeks later. So wouldn't recommend that to everybody.
That's incredible. Yeah, yeah, it's very quick.
But we were very lucky in that we had things set up, and it was a very smooth transition. So
yeah. So the practicalities are, I suppose, a different discussion, but just that kind of deciding that you're going to physically relocate, that's a huge decision to make, especially when there's 4 of you.
yeah.
Easy to go on your own, but to come back with all these extras, I suppose it's a different level of packing and thinking about where you're going to go to.
Yeah.
Now, Richy, you were in London. I'm from London. It doesn't feel as distant. It's easier perhaps to come back and visit. Would you want to talk about your story?
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you. So, I mean, I left to go to London in 1998, January 1998. I was 17 years of age. I came back to Ireland, I think in 2000 for a year. It just wasn't right for me. It wasn't working out. I went back to the UK. Done a couple of small few jobs over here, worked down in Cork and that, worked in Limerick. And I just couldn't settle back in. I think I had a little taste for London, and then it kind of got the juices flowing, so to speak, you know. So I went back to London again. But in terms of moving back, it wasn't just for myself, it was for my family as well, you know, just to be there for, you know, for support. You know, my mother's getting older. None of us are getting any younger, obviously. And I just wanted to be support for the rest of my family, because, you know, they've taken a lot on in regards to being there for my mum the whole time. Obviously been in London for, you know, for 25 years. I've had the benefit of being able to come and go whenever I like. So I'm always getting a little teaser of back home. And if I'd stay for like, maybe I'd visit Ireland probably 4 times a year normally anyway. So every time I come home, you know, you miss, because London is your home, you miss your own bed. But really, when you come back to Ireland, you miss everything else about Ireland. You're only going back to your own bed. That's all it was really for me, you know. But I just found myself stagnant. So the last 10 years of my life in London, I lived in one property for 10 years, which I'd never done. I'd never been, you know, that stable in terms of, you know, accommodation, work, etc. So although it was good in one side, I don't think I was happy, truly happy, and I felt stagnant. I felt disconnected from nature, you know, and I just thought I needed to be back home, you know, because every time I came home, it was another little knock on the, you know, another chip on the wall. Like, so really and truly, getting married was probably the deciding factor. We got married last year in Ireland, and we said, look, we'll get married and then we'll move. And obviously having a wife on the team as well who wanted to move just as much as me made the decision a whole lot easier, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like there's a time to move and there's a time to come home.
Yeah.
You kind of had itchy feet, and then you got to the point where you needed to be back. You wanted to be back.
And who's to say I won't go back to London in 10 years time?
Yeah, yeah. And those connections endure, perhaps change. We might come back to that. So now that you are back, and you're all back at for different lengths of time, what are have a think about what are the things that have maybe surprised you, or what did you find changed, or how did you realize that you had changed as a result of coming home? What's been difficult? What are the challenges for you to just kind of settle back in? And again, is there an event or a story or a moment where you've just gone, oh, I'm so glad I made this decision? And I know it's easy to be thinking, oh, if I'd stayed in the other life, what would I be doing now? And you know, that kind of equivalence of where you could be, but now you're here. How do you reflect on your time away, and what has made you think, great, I'm glad I've done that. I did that big decision and now I'm here. Any of you really like to share any examples with us?
Go, Richy.
Anyone jump in, go on.
Way.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, there's a few questions in there, I suppose. But first, one thing is definitely you obviously change when you go away, and then when you come back, I think there is a bit of a process of grief, not in the traditional sense, but you are saying goodbye to an old life. And I know, like, for the first 2-3 years, you know, definitely for the first year, I purposely switched off everything in terms of Australia. I didn't want to look at it, didn't want to, you know, wasn't on Facebook, didn't really want to know what was going on, because I thought it was bad for me. And that's actually how I ended up writing, because I was kind of struggling. My wife Anne-Marie was at home, settled, happy within 5 minutes. You know, but there's definitely that process of saying goodbye to an old life in some way, and letting go of all that and recreating a new one. So it is like emigrating a second time, and it's harder because you're older. You know, when you're in your 20s, you're looking for new experiences, not so much when you're 40. But I think it's been great for me, because now I have a different kind of mindset, where every few years you kind of feel like you know, you reinvent yourself in some way. Like, but there's definitely, like, there was surprises, you know. I think sometimes relationships that you thought you were going to fall back into, there's a gap between the expectation that you have, I think. Not all relationships, but there was pleasant surprises there for me. And I remember having a conversation with my dad one time, you know, and I was, you know, complaining about, you know, me readjusting to life, and we're talking about relationships, and he was like, don't forget, like, we're all readjusting to having you back. You know, they hadn't seen me in 16 years. So it wasn't just me, it was them. I'd never thought about that, like, you know.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of an eye-opener. And then there was just, like, when you come back from Australia, lifestyle, you know, that was a big thing. It sounds really trivial, you know, it's not just the weather, but, like, it's the daylight, it's the dark winter, we're very much, you know, in tune with the daylight cycle. Like, our bodies, our moods are really influenced by that. And I think I underestimated it. I take, you know, vitamin D now during the winter and stuff like that. And I try and get out and as much as I can. But those little things, you know, that you can overcome them all, but it's just harder. You just have to be much more conscious of what you're doing and your decisions, and make an extra effort to bring that lifestyle back, you know. So I think for me, like, settling back wasn't a specific turning point. It was for me, it was a gradual erosion of my resistance to being back, to be honest. You know, it was like, I resisted it for 2 years, and then I said, right, I gotta start letting go of stuff. And as I said, that's why the writing started, and I was, like, looking after my mental health.
So you kind of needed to find an outlet for, or where dealing with that kind of grief that you talked about.
Yeah. And I wanted to come home, you know, like, you know, I want to come home, but you still have to go through that adjustment, like, yeah.
But the other thing is, partly, I suppose, I don't know what the others think about this, is the fact that you're coming home suggests that it should be easy because it's home. It's not like the first adventure where you expect it to be different and challenging, but when you come home, it should be, well, that's going back to somewhere that I know, and security, and it's not necessarily that easy. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Anyone else to tell us? Richy, do you want to?
Just what James said there about what his dad said to him about, you know, people have to adjust to you as well. which I never thought of either. Like, to be honest with you, maybe I'm in my own bubble as well, but it's true. People have to get used to having you around the whole time or seeing you again. So this is also something that people maybe fail to take on board. But I'm going to have to remember that one myself now.
Yeah, I think we all do. What about Richy? Did you have any moments where you've gone, oh, I'm so glad I'm here? Anything small, even just, I don't know, finding something familiar or?
I mean, it's great for me because I did keep in contact with people, obviously through social media, and obviously doing what I do. You know, we've been on newspaper, we've been on this, that, local papers, or been on TV, etc. So people would have, you know, back home, school friends or whatever, would have kept in contact. And obviously because I was back so, you know, so frequently during my 25 years. But to come home and everyone's like, oh, you're home full time now? You're home? Are you sure you're going to stay home? You know, great to have you. It's nice to be welcomed back when other people are happy for you as well, you know. So that's, you know, that's something which was definitely, you know, a driving force for me, feeling better, you know, settling back in. And in terms of like the simplicity, I was out in the garden the other day, grounding in the bare feet, and I was just listening to the birds, and I was thinking, like, these are just some tiny little things you take for granted, you know. I didn't have the opportunity to do that where I lived in, you know, in a tower block in London. It was just inaccessible for me. And just to be able to just open up your back door and have silence, just to be able to, you know, submerged in nature. I just thought how lucky I am. You know, I'm very, very lucky to have it. And that's probably, these are the things that I really appreciate. And I don't, you know, I can find them elsewhere around the world, but this is one thing that's cemented to me, you know.
Those kind of small things, small moments. Sarah, did you have anything on that one?
I was just thinking about how I often have moments of gratitude. Like I could just be driving back from school drop off, and I find the roads here just so much quieter than Sydney, and just a slower pace of life. And I kind of, it's like I almost feel a relief. Like I go, oh, that was like really easy compared to, you know, rush hour traffic through a big city like Sydney. And
And you are in Dublin, so it's not like you've
yeah,
come back to rural roads or.
yeah, yeah. And to me, it's very quiet and easy to park. I still catch myself thinking, I wonder, do I need to pay for parking or is there going to be parking? Because in Sydney, you just always have to think about that. And most of the time here, it's absolutely fine. And where my mom lives in the town, like I can park on her road and walk to the town. I don't need to ever, worry about parking stuff. But like we're very settled now. I feel like last time around maybe was a bit of a rehearsal for this time. It's really caught me by surprise how, like, yes, we've had challenges, more than happy to talk about the challenges, but the actual, like, a year down the track, I feel like we're very well adjusted, and just having that time in nature and like going for walks and the birds and the tree, like all those things you take for granted, I suppose. And I suppose this time I haven't really spend time of like looking back or comparing, which that kind of got me last time. I would often be having conversations with friends in Sydney and my work colleagues that I'd worked with a long time, and I'd find myself feeling like I was missing out. And this time I'm very much focused on, I suppose, the present and what's happening, what do the kids need, what do I need, self-care, and just kind of staying in our own bubble. And we're quite introverted, so I haven't had to navigate too much in terms of relationships and friendships. Like I just kind of have picked up where I've left off with some of my friends. But yeah, and I've been away so long that it is kind of like trying to form new friendships now and immerse ourselves in the community bit by bit, but we're doing it very slowly.
And your own pace.
Yeah.
Sarah, when we met before, you had a lovely story about your daughter reconnecting, or an event where your grandmothers were there, I think, was it?
Yeah.
Where
We
you
had
thought
an event where my daughter said the sweetest thing of like, my grandmothers really love me and I really love them, and like just priceless, because in Australia it was just so distant, and trying to organize calls with the time difference was totally impossible for us. And there has been moments of feeling guilt and even making the decision to move back, of taking my daughter, she's 8, and away from everything that she had in her life and her supports in school. And for her to say that, it just made it feel really special and nice to know that she feels connected and part of the family. And I mean, they love her, so she feels
and
it.
that's something you've gained, that that no amount of online calls could could replicate, could it?
Yeah.
That feeling of being like in the room with the
Yeah.
grandparents. It's lovely.
Yeah.
Just to go back to something Richy said there about I can't quite remember how you worded it, about meeting people who maybe comment on, oh, so you're back, are you glad to be back? And I'm just wondering about how you all talk to people about the time that you were away, when it can be difficult for people to really fully understand the reality of 19 years away or 25 years away. So how do you talk to people you know well, and how do you talk to in kind of small talk, polite conversation where people are just saying, oh, you must be glad to be back? And what's the response to that? How do you sum it up in a couple of sentences? Tell us about that.
So for me, it's kind of based on the person I'm talking to, you know, so I only let off a certain amount of information compared to, you know, how close I know the person. So if I know the person, you know, I would, you know, tell them I'm happy to be home and all the rest, but I'd also, you know, remind them that, you know, obviously when I left, it wasn't to a bed of roses, you know. I'd tell them that, you know, it was a struggle, but I didn't want to leave during the struggle, you know. I wanted to obviously ride it out and then come back when I wanted to come back, not been forced to leave London because things didn't work out. And I think a lot of time you see that happen with people. They run back to places as soon as one thing goes wrong for them, they run back and they don't stick it out. And sometimes when you stick it out, I think, you know, things can work out better for you. But you know, I tell people I'm happy to be home because I am happy to be home. There's not really beating around the bush when it comes to stuff like that, you know.
Yeah,
but
fair
I also
enough.
say, you know, that it wasn't a bed of roses.
Yeah.
Mm.
Any other stories or?
I used to pause, so you know, I'm kind of too old not to be honest about it. To be honest, if people ask me whether I'm happy or not, but definitely I'm happier now. But I used to pause, and people had
So
noticed the
that question
pause.
was, are you glad to be back? And you
Yeah,
pause.
yeah, and you'd pause. So no matter what you said after that, they'd still know. They'd be like, I'm not convinced. So you know, it's
Okay.
kind of like returnees doubt or something, you know. But I think sometimes people obviously can't relate to your life overseas, so it's like a gap when you're talking to some people. You start talking about another country that they've never been to, they can't relate to it, and I used to find that a little bit awkward at the start, but I don't think it's good for you if you don't talk about it. If it's a natural part of the conversation and you're talking about, you know, kids or your first house or whatever, and it happens to be, you know, overseas where you bought that, you had that experience, talk about it, because otherwise you're overthinking it and you know, I feel like you're holding back. I don't think you should deny any part of you, even if other people can't relate to it. Doesn't mean you have to bang on about it, like, you know, but you can see, you know, I used to see people like just, they couldn't relate, they didn't really care, but, you know, it's if it's part of a natural conversation and it comes up, say
But
it and
not
move
like,
on, you
oh,
know.
when
Yeah.
I was in Sydney
Yeah,
every
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You
This
know,
is how we did it in
it's not your
Sydney.
conversation starter, but it shouldn't be your conversation stopper either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
What about you, Sarah? Do you have the pause, the returnees pause?
No, not at all. First time I was very honest with people and I said we were like in two minds. We were kind of stuck or we were struggling, and then they just changed the subject. So it was difficult for people to understand that kind of grief that you do go through. And this time, the only question people ask now is, are you back for good? Are you staying? Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of like, you know, maybe they'll pack up and leave, you know, but definitely not. We're really happy and we're just, yeah, making plans for the future now.
Yeah, very good. And I think again, I think I spoke to you all about this before, but that fact that you're all kind of still able to talk about it, help other people through your own conversations, like being part of the conversation on the experience of return migration, is part of getting used to the change and the new life that you're leading. So what would you encourage people to, how would you encourage people to be part of a conversation, and to what extent would you say that would help people?
I think it would help greatly. For me, I just had a guy I talked to who had left about 6 months before me, and I used to just call him. I used to work with him, even just talking to someone about it, you know, what lies ahead. Someone who maybe is just ahead of you, who can relate to it. Talking about it is really good. I think it's important if you're thinking about it, even to be able to talk to someone who, you know, has done it before, maybe is invaluable.
And
It
that's
definitely helped me.
and that's sort of even beyond the practicalities of I know this is the subject of a different webinar, so I won't get into getting the PPS number and the bank account and all those kind of things sorted out, but it's actually talking to people about how you're feeling about that displacement that you're going through. Would that be fair?
Yeah, it's exactly. It's not the logistics that are going to trip you up. This is a decision of the heart, and it's a big decision. Most people, I think, if they go with their gut, will be okay. But the way to make a right decision is to talk about it with somebody. So no, this isn't the logistics. The logistics will sort themselves out if you make the right decision. That's actually the easy part.
It's what's inside. Is that where we're
Yeah, it's a life
in
change.
here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. The logistics, people get really caught up in that and spending a long time weighing up things from that sort of head space, when actually logic has nothing to do with this decision, in my opinion. A lot of it is within, and like for me, it's felt like a soul calling to come back onto Irish soil. I know not everybody is able to do that, but I would say if you're going through the process of this, should I stay or should I go, like really go inside and like spend time there, because the other stuff, as James said, it will sort itself out. It can be the frustrating part of the journey, but getting the head and mindset in a good place is pretty much most of the battle. What do you think?
Yeah.
I definitely agree with Sarah. You know, I feel like I was being called to Ireland as well. You know, like my consciousness, my soul was saying, look, it's the time now. You have to take this step. When you take the step, everything will work out. It mightn't happen for you overnight, but it will happen. And then I believe in my heart of hearts that that will be the truth, you know. And I also find that, you know, people will be phoning me and saying, oh, geez, you look like you're having a whale of a time back home and this, that, and all the rest. But, you know, they see pictures and see greenery and see this and that. But I've also came home to some pretty, you know, some pretty full-on personal issues as well that also have to be dealt with, and these are things that we need to be prepared for as well. You know, could it be old wounds, this, that, and you know, having your partner, if you're coming home on your own is one thing, but if you're coming home with children or with a partner, you know, are they on board? You know, are you making a decision for them, or is it something that you both want? You know, these are questions that have to be had, I suppose, as well.
So tell us a little bit about that. Like, I'm very much of the opinion that you can't really speak for the other people because it was their experience and their migration. But how do you think the move impacted on partners and children, and how does it kind of stay with you and them into the future? Do you want to talk a bit about your moving with a partner, Richy? Because you moved from London and she didn't move home in the way that you moved home.
And she has to keep correcting me all the time. So when I speak to people, I'm like, oh yeah, we've just moved back after 25 years in London. And she's like, no, I didn't move back. I've moved over. And I'm like, oh yes,
yeah.
You know, because you know, you forget these things as well.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a challenge then perhaps for you. The responsibility is maybe on you for her.
To a degree, obviously, where my wife is of Caribbean descent as well. It's where I live. There's not many people, you know, black people in the town, especially Caribbeans. And, you know, it's for me, when I went to Ireland, there was always the Irish club, the Irish centre, the pub. There was always somewhere for us to go if we wanted to. Whereas, you know, if someone from a different culture comes to Ireland, it mightn't necessarily be that there for them. So this is things that we need to take into consideration as well. Now, I know my wife enjoys being in Ireland and she's, you know, she's happy, and she's under the understanding nothing's going to happen overnight as well. You know, we're probably just getting stuck in with business. So I haven't really had a time to, you know, to venture around and start getting involved in as much community organizations as we'd like to. But that's something that can be done, you know. I also think sometimes you have to take yourself out of your comfort zone if you want, you know, to be involved in things, because, you know, sometimes people are, my wife is an introvert as well, so it's a lot harder for her to, you know, to be out in social circles than it would be for me. So at the same time I'm coming home to my family, I'm taking her away from hers. So, you know, luckily it's only London and we can go back every couple of months, but it's still something that, you know, that
It just needs to be renegotiated, or you have to
And so-
adapt to still, don't you? Yeah, yeah. What about James and Sarah, your partners, your children? Your children were young when you came back?
Yeah, yeah. 8, 6, and 3, and like luckily myself and Anne-Marie were both wanted to come back, and we tried to make it as exciting for them as possible. They were young enough, you know, in their development, where like a 3-year-old just wants, you know, safety, and 6-year-old just wants family, and the 8-year-old probably starting to branch out, friends and stuff like that. So it was almost like now or never, maybe not never, but now is the best time. And they I do remember, Sarah, you talking about your daughter feeling that sense of family at one of the events, and I remember my middle daughter also saying like she felt like she was in a big, you know, cushion or something. You know, she said something specific at the time that really made us relieved, I guess, that you know, we didn't uproot them for no reason, you know. And I see them when they grow older. I'm sure they'll all emigrate like we did, and see the world, and hopefully maybe come back home as well. Like, but yeah, I think it's been good for them. They have, like,
And they
my
could
parents
settle
have
back
20
into
grandchildren. Yeah,
the
settled
older
back
one
well.
could settle into school and everything easy enough at that age. Yeah.
Yeah. She came back actually. She made her communion about 2 days after we arrived back. Very important Irish event, the communion. But we actually, you know, did that. We came back in May, so she could make her communion with her new class, and we had the summer ahead to settle them in. So we were conscious of making it as easy as possible for them. We spent a bit of extra money as well, like doing things that were fun, so that, you know, it felt like an adventure until they settled in. And their accents, actually, you know, they went from
Yeah,
Australian accents
really
super
interesting.
quick to Irish. You know, they're
Yeah, yeah.
so spongy, and they just want to fit
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
So we were lucky with their ages as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah, yours were similar age, were they?
Similar age, so the youngest was 2. I worried about him because he was in a family daycare and he was very attached to, you know, the people there, and he settled in fine. Like, we started him in play school and he doesn't look back. So that was a real relief. Because yeah, I just wondered would it really knock him, but he was absolutely fine. My 7-year-old, who's now 8, she still has an Aussie accent. She's hanging on for dear life. She went through an awful time, to be honest. The schools here, they put her in the wrong year. She was not supposed to be in senior infants. She was like, yeah, she's functioning at a second class level. So we actually skipped a year, even though she'd missed a lot of school last year. We changed schools 3 times. So that was not what I envisaged at all. But a year down the track, she's now in my old primary school, and which is, yeah, amazing. My communion photos are on the walls of the corridors from,
Oh, that's lovely.
yeah, in the 80s. So and they've got the support that she needs, a fantastic sensory room. You know, she's got amazing wraparound support. So that's a relief, but it took a lot to get there. And there were times when she was really depressed and she was like, what am I doing here? Like, I just want to go back to my old life in Australia. But like James, we booked holidays to go away in March. We're going away again this year. So, you know, I've had lots of things for her to look forward to. She hates the winter, and I suppose that was the only real thing for my husband, since we moved back, because he works in Australia, he worked indoors, but here he's on a building site and it was outdoors. So he started in January and that was pretty tough. There were a lot of days he was absolutely soaking and he was like, what have we done? But he's come good. I think he's actually really relieved. He's been treated really well here. There's been a difference. I didn't imagine there's been a difference in his feelings of confidence and belonging even in the workplace here has really dramatically improved from Australia. You're always kind of the migrant. He didn't have his citizenship, I did, so he didn't have the same security over there, whereas here he's well respected, he's been promoted, they've put him forward for other opportunities. So I mean, yeah, he's feeling good about that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's good to hear. So I'm kind of conscious that our time is coming to an end. Interesting, James, just when you said that your child who felt like they were connected, did you say to a cushion of the family around you?
Yeah, I
Or
can't
around
remember the
them, yeah,
exact
when they
words,
come
but
back.
yeah,
And
yeah.
again, and Sarah, your comment about the connecting with the grandmothers, James's comment reminded me there when I used to come over from my holidays from London, and that sense of connection to my extended family that I didn't really have when we were on our own as this migrant family in London. And that feeling that you were related to this person and there were grandparents and there were aunts and uncles and cousins, and that lovely feeling of connection. I think it's interesting to hear it's still important, and it still continues down the generations. So you went away as an Irish person and you came back as a Irish Australian or a London Irish person, or you had this other place with you. So just tell us, to finish off, I suppose, how did the place change you, and how has it stayed with you, or how did you readapt? So your accent, things you say, perhaps the food, your food preferences, your lifestyle. I think, James, you talked about the brightness and the lifestyle you could have in the daylight and the warmth. Any food habits, anything else that you learned or you adapted to away and you're still trying to shake off now you're back, or how are you settling back in?
I'll
Well,
go real quick. Sorry, Sarah, go. Yeah.
Quick, yeah,
I was going to say that's a massive question.
Yeah.
Hard to summarize. When I met my husband, I was living in Sydney 11 years at the time, and apparently I had more of an Aussie accent. I was working with all Aussies and my friends were Aussie, but then marrying a fellow Dub, I think got some of my Irish accent back. I don't know. It's hard to know, isn't it? But I was I was painfully shy. I still am, as I said, an introvert, but going to Australia helped me get out of my shell, because you're forced to stand up for yourself and advocate. And, I went and restudied to become a social worker out there. So I went to university, and, I was in, crazy situations even as a social worker. So it changed me completely in that way. Whereas before I would kind of, I don't know, shy away from, having conversations with people or even doing something like this. I think it's shaped me as a person. But yeah, I think in terms of culture, I never moved away from being Irish, as in, like, I always wanted to be part of the community in some way. And thankfully, like, when I went there, we didn't even have like Facebook. And then to see how far things have come, and to be part of like online communities, to go to meetups, to host events, to get immersed in all of that. I think it's such a change from when I first went there. Like, that was amazing. Over the 19 years. Yeah.
Anything else that what bits of Australia have stayed with you, James, or bits of London have stayed with you, Richy? Ways of being?
I'd say for me, really, I mean, I embraced being Irish when I went to London, because I wasn't Irish when I was in Ireland. I was just
Okay, yeah.
So I definitely, embraced my Irishness when I went there. But in terms of culture, things that I took on board would mostly been Caribbean culture, Afro-Caribbean, especially, the Jamaican culture. Maybe when I came over the first couple of times back from London, I had slang like I picked up overnight, like a child. And then then you come back to Ireland and say, what are you talking like that for? You've only been gone a year. And you think, oh yeah. But I'm lucky enough I kept my accent after 25 years. But in terms of music, in terms of food, I definitely glad I went to London and was fully absorbed in Jamaican culture, because it's so vibrant, it's so like ours, but just with a little bit of extra spice,
A bit warmer.
Yeah.
James, anything?
Well, I obviously don't have the accent, but I do keep a few sayings that I think are really relaxing, like, like no worries and things like that. I do like those sort of laconic, lazy sayings that Aussies have. I still try and surf a bit, so that lifestyle that I learned in Sydney, and camping and that outdoor lifestyle, definitely try and keep as much of that as I can. Um, and probably, I mean, this probably would have happened anyway, but probably just going overseas and being open to new opportunities and skills. I think I probably got more skills that I would have had I stayed here. Might have been related to just having the mindset, but I probably have a bit more confidence than I would have had I stayed. So probably brought a bit of that, um, you know, uh, what would you call it? Can-do attitude that I got over there. So
Yeah, and the
yeah.
opportunity. So all three of you talked about the opportunities that were available to you and taking them when you had the opportunity to get to use them. I don't know, Sarah, if Sarah. Oh, and there's a lot of Sarahs on this call, but Sarah, do you want to jump back in here and hi, Sarah?
All the Sarahs joining the Sarahs again. We should have called this Coming Home, the Sarahs,
Yeah.
plus James and Richie.
The three Sarahs.
No, listen, that's a fantastic conversation. I could listen to the four of you talk so much longer. And in fact, so many of the questions open up other questions, I think, is the sense that I get. So I just want to say thank you so much to you all. That was really powerful to listen to your stories. And Sarah, thank you so much for asking the questions and being curious, I suppose. We do have a number of questions that have come through in the Q&A. So thank you very much to everyone. We're not going to get to them all, but if you do have a burning question, now's the chance to put it in the Q&A there. And I'll be putting them to our wonderful panel. I might start, and I'm not going to do this in order, but I might start with a question that we've got from Martin Russell, which is, thank you for sharing your stories. I was struck by Richard's point about struggle and also the practical experiences of return. Ireland is now becoming home to many diasporas from around the world, which I think will be a superpower for the country in the long term. So I was wondering if the panelists would have any ideas on how we can better share the stories of the Irish diaspora, including those who have returned, gone through struggle to success, etc., to help counter the current migration rhetoric or discontent that's building in Ireland. The panel have very much walked the walk, and some of those struggles, so not telling those stories would be a missed opportunity for Ireland, I sense. So it's a big theme, a big question, but would anyone like to answer that, just from your point of view?
Yeah, I'll go with that one. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned earlier on, the Epic Museum have the 50 years of Irish in Britain, like having spaces like that to do, to show people's stories and what people have been through, really opens up people's eyes. Some people haven't a clue what Irish people went through when they left. They've heard stories, but they haven't actually heard, people's stories. They haven't put a name to the story or a face to the story. And I think we should have somewhere in Ireland where that should be, on display the whole time. And people who are coming over can go spend time with other people, and tell them they don't necessarily have to be from Ireland. They can be from anywhere, and explain what it's like for them coming to Ireland, because, we all, as immigrants, we all know, what it entails.
Absolutely, yeah. And actually that exhibition is still currently running at the Epic Museum. If you haven't been down to Epic and you are in Dublin, it's definitely worth a visit. And I think it's running till mid-July, I feel.
Yeah, and I think there's plans to move it to other locations as well. I don't know if they're confirmed yet, but yeah, well worth a visit.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to jump on that question, or will I move to the next one?
Yeah, it's a huge question. My head is spinning on that one. So yeah, may perhaps move to another one.
Thank you for that, Martin. That's brilliant. We have a question here from Helen, and she says, what tips in one sentence could each of you give me to help me with my decision to return after 31 years in Germany, but always returning back home on a regular basis? My parents have now passed away, and my remaining family members don't expect too much support due to illness, etc. I'm not sure if I'll fit in again at this age. I'd like to make the decision, as I've never felt at home in Germany. My children and grandchildren are here, so I think they're the main reason I'm still here. When you say here, I presume you mean in Germany. So one sentence to sum up how you made the decision, maybe.
I'd like to have a go at that one.
Go ahead, James.
I'll tell you a little story first, right? Just going back to the gut decision or the heart decision,
One
right?
sentence.
Okay, yeah, but I have to tell the story and then I have to give the tip, right? So we actually did a pros and cons in a spreadsheet, right, where we had Ireland versus Australia, gave them a score, had weightings, it gave us the answer, right? And the answer was Australia, right? According to the pros and cons, it won hands down. We didn't like the answer, right? So obviously our heart was telling us, right, that's not the answer you want. So we changed all the weightings, added some more criteria, and we made the spreadsheet tell us what we wanted to do, right? But that's a story, but it's actually wasn't a bad exercise because by writing down what we were thinking, it actually was part of the exploration journey. But my one line tip is have an attitude of no regrets. So think about what you would regret in 10 or 20 years and have a good think about that. As Sarah said before, go inside, and if you make a decision with having no regrets in mind, I think it'll be the right one. And call me if you have any problems.
One line from anyone else?
It's not one line, but this is not something I came up with, but I often think about this when going through big decisions that I need to make. Like what's the worst that can happen? And if it happened, would I be able to handle it? And I think we forget how resilient we actually are.
Very good.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, very good. I think that's very good. I'd just say go with your heart. You know, follow your heart.
Thanks, Richy. Sarah says, thanks for the stories. They're very helpful, particularly that it's not all about me going to Ireland after 35 years in the US, but a big adjustment for my lot there. Any one thing that was unexpected that I might want to consider? So is there any one thing that when you returned, you hadn't really expected?
The cost of living has jumped massively. That really, like I heard, but like to come back and just to get our first electricity bill, like, whoa. So yeah, that got me.
Yeah, housing crisis. I'm still looking for, for a home. I'm lucky enough to have like friends and family, but in terms of accommodation, it can be really hard to find the right place. So
Not as much rain. There's not as much rain in Dublin as there is in Sydney, actually. Didn't know that till I saw a graph.
Look at the positives.
Yeah, exactly.
There's actually a question here about how did you acclimate to the weather? So there you go. That'll be a surprise to people. There's less rain in Dublin.
Just have to get out at the right time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't climatized at all. I'm not one of these people that can jump in the water and do ice baths or sea swims or any of that stuff. I literally bunker down for the winter and hibernate. So yeah, it was a long one this year. And I think, yeah, you still go about your life and you can't, yeah, one thing I don't do is check the weather. I find like everyone I talk to knows what's coming or the weather for the weekend or the long weekend. And I just wake up and look out the window and people think that's really strange. Like, what do you mean you haven't checked the weather? I'm like, well, I'm just going to get on with life anyway. You can't plan your whole life around, but yeah, because it just changes in 5 minutes anyway.
That's great. Thank you. Nolene says, amazing to hear your stories. Could be me in future returning Abhaile, who knows? Do you find that you are very different in your outlooks compared to people who have not lived abroad? I'd be concerned about the big adjustment after 30 years away.
Most definitely. Yeah, I think, sometimes people get stuck in a rut, and I'm not throwing shade on anyone in my family or anyone in the community, but sometimes you have to be taken out of where you are to see things differently, and if you don't come out of your comfort zone, and if you're not put in situations where you have to, adapt, etc., then you might not ever change the way you think, So I do think, having the benefit of being somewhere, maybe you can be the person to help other people have a more of an open mind as well. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise.
We have time for one last question, so let me put it to you. And this is more, James, for yourself and for Sarah. At what age do you think it starts to get harder for children to adjust to the changes in terms of losing friends or changing school? Is there an ideal time to move back with a child, or does it depend?
So there's a bit of science behind this in terms of children's brain development. So the lowest impact is 0 to 1, because they just need comforts and safety. And then preschool 1 to 4 tends to be a little bit higher if they're moving home, like because they're moving from their home, not necessarily the country, but they're moving from their home. So that can be a bit of an impact, but they're young enough that it won't be a major thing necessarily. Then primary age 5 to 12, that's like medium impact, because you know, you can make it exciting. They're a little bit more mature. They do want to fit in, but once they get to, like, you know, teenage years, that's when they're really established with friends and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's different impacts, different ages, but there's definitely some science behind the brain development and everything else there.
Yeah, I would agree. I love that, backed by science. I think that really helped for us with moving back. We actually went and got some of the same furniture from IKEA that the kids loved in Sydney, and we had that ready for us when we arrived back. So my 2-year-old had the same table and chairs and his little armchair and his bookshelf, and we brought all of his favorite stuff back. And the same with my 7-year-old, like we brought all her bedding, her duvet, her pillow, like just to have the same, try to have some of the same smells and textures, and like from a sensory point of view. But yeah, that's a great
It's a
answer.
really good idea, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's a
just
really
to bring the
helpful tip.
familiarity for them,
But
because
I
so
suppose,
much changes for them
yeah,
as
but that
well.
would be the same whether or not you move Limerick to Dublin or Sydney to Dublin. You know, the move. It's the move, isn't it? It's not the difference of huge distance across the planet. Sorry, carry on, Sarah. Any more questions?
No, those are the questions we've received, and I just thank everyone. You know, you've asked some really great questions. I also just want to say that, look, we haven't had time to go into the practical side of things, but if you are looking for information around things like, you know, planning your move back, the logistics of how that's all going to work, we have loads of resources on our website, diasporasupport.ie. You'll find them there under the Returning to Ireland section. We also have a contact form and an email that you can get in touch with us. It's irishdiasporasupport@crosscare.ie. So if we haven't been able to answer your questions this evening, please feel free to get in touch. Have a look at the website. There's also plenty of resources other than just ourselves. You have the Citizens Information Board, citizensinformation.ie. They have a Returning to Ireland section. And that's all the practical side of things. And there is plenty of information out there. And in fact, I think the information has gotten better in the last number of years. Once you're looking in the right place, if you like. So what we were hoping to do this evening was just to really look beyond the practical, what happens when the dust settles. And I think that James, Richy, and Sarah have really spoken from the heart and told you their personal stories, which I think is really powerful. The one thing that I always like to try and remember is they're exactly that, they're personal stories. You know, everyone has a personal story, everyone's journey is different. Take what's useful from today. And anything that doesn't apply to yourself, then you'll know straight away that that's not the case. Sarah, I'm conscious, Sarah Hannafin, I'm conscious we haven't really had time to ask you any questions, but obviously one last thing that maybe we can end on is just for you. You moved to Ireland, but in some ways it was almost a return because you grew up in an Irish family in the UK, and we're seeing an increasing number of people who are making that same move, who've applied for Irish citizenship and are moving over to Ireland. Is there anything that you'd say to people in that situation about making Ireland home, or anything that you'd give as a tip for adjusting?
I don't know. It's a long time since I came. I came in 2004. And I suppose I didn't have a plan really. It was quite an easy move in a sense because there's no need for visas or work permits or no language restrictions or anything really, and very easy to go back again. So all of a sudden it's 20 years and I'm kind of, how did this happen? Yeah, I don't know. And of course I always would have come. I would have come as a child regularly, and I came all through adulthood fairly regularly. It isn't the same as coming on holiday, and you do need to adjust. But that, like you know, like I say, there were moments there, and there still are moments where I think, oh, I'm so glad I'm here, and this is exactly why I'm here, or you know, something might happen again, something small. And then there's other times where I think, perhaps a little bit like the lady in Germany, sometimes where I think I'm not quite home, and I'm not quite home anywhere, and maybe that's just a condition of being a migrant for a lot of people. And you know, and it comes and goes, that kind of feeling. So I don't have a solution. I don't have a kind of a final kind of answer for that. I suppose a tidy answer. You just go with it and enjoy as much as possible, I suppose.
Thank you. And I think that resonates. I know myself, having moved here as well from abroad, and 20 years later, in the blink of an eye, Ireland is home. I think you're right. It is probably a feature of having lived abroad and being an immigrant at some stage in your life. And your perception of home is possibly different. So I think that's a nice note to leave this evening on. I just want to let everyone know, excuse me, sorry, just one second. I want to let everyone know that a recording of the webinar will be available on diasporasupport.ie. It'll also be available on our YouTube channel at Irish Diaspora Support. So if you don't follow us there, please do. Also hope that you'll continue this conversation online using hashtag Abhaile 2024. And if any of the other panels that we have this week are of interest, it's still time to sign up. So have a look at diasporasupport.ie. And finally, just many thanks for attending today's event. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our moderator, Sarah, our speakers, Sarah, James, Richy, for sharing their invaluable insights, answering all your questions, being so generous with their time, and giving us such food for thought. On that note, we'll leave you, and Slán Abhaile.
Slán Abhaile.
Slán Abhaile.
Think so.